Hello everyone, in this video we will be talking about horrifying experiments done by Nazis which led to the development of Nuremberg Code later. So what happened during World War II between the time of 1942 to 45? A number of physicians, basically German doctors, conducted painful and deadly experiments on thousands of prisoners without their permission. They have not informed them, they have not taken their permission. So these experiments were unethical, right? Because they were done without the consent or any safeguarding procedures. Experiments generally centered around three topics. The first was survival of military personnel. So the experiments were designed in the camps. The intention was to facilitate the survival of military persons in the field. Second nature of experiments were the testing of drugs and treatments. And third was the advancement of Nazi race and their ideology. So these were the three categories. And these experiments included freezing prisoners to test their limits, exposing them to high altitude, injecting them with various diseases and toxins, and also include sterilization and forced procedures. The first experiment we talk about is high altitude conditions. So the purpose of these experiments was to develop the techniques which could help basically German pilots to fly at high altitudes without suffering from any effect of a low oxygen. The results of these experiments were used to develop high altitude suits and other equipments for German pilots. The experiments basically conducted in concentration camps in the Germany, and they exposed prisoners to very high altitude conditions like up to 68,000 feet high to see how their body is responding. The prisoners were basically placed in low pressure chambers, then their air pressure was rapidly reduced to stimulate high altitude conditions. So this caused symptoms like hypoxia, low oxygen, right, which further led to headache, nausea, dizziness, and many more dangerous effects. Some prisoners also suffered from seizures and loss of consciousness. And the one of the which was notes, those were read. It describes the experiment as which was performed on one of the clerk, that a person was given an oxygen mask raised in the chamber to atmospheric elevation of 47,000 feet high. Then at that point mask was removed, and once the mask was removed, and they described the victim's reactions, like victim experienced chronic convulsions, groaning, he bites his tongue and does not respond to speech, and no one can do these type of things in right set of their mindset, right? Another type of experiment, they are known as a freezing experiment. They are also very dangerous. The freezing experiments involved immersing persons in a freezing temperature and leaving them outdoor in very less temperature for an extended period of time. The goal was to stimulate the condition experienced by basically German forces or soldiers, those are fighting on Eastern Front, and so that they can find a way to treat hypothermia. So prisoners were subjected to temperature as low as minus 40 degrees. Not only that, they were also exposed in open air for long hours, where the temperature could go for minus 6 degree, that too totally naked. Besides studying the physical effect of cold exposure, the experiment also assessed different methods of how they can rewarm the survivors. And one of the incident which was described is that they have thrown a person in a boiling water to rewarm that person. So and many, as you know, and they also made a notes at 4 degree temperature when person died, what was his body temperature, and if the person died at 6 degree, what was his body temperature. They made a publication out of these experiments. Another type of experiment they have done is seawater drinking experiment, just to understand how they can make a seawater drinkable. And these victims were subjected, they were not given any food at all, and they were only given a filtered seawater. At one point, around roughly 90 people were involved in this experiment. People were licking the floor to have water. They were so dehydrated, right? So this nature of this experiment is really horrifying. Another experiment which was more in a line to how they want to increase their race is experiment on twins. So basically this twin experiment was created to show the superiority of heredity over the environment, and they were intention to find a way to increase the German race. They experimented around 1500 set of twins, and they were subjected to lot many conditions like imputation. They infected them with various diseases. They injected dyes in their eyes to change their color. Also attempted to create conjoined twins by sewing the twins together, and this caused gangrene and eventually death of the twins. And in such scenarios where one twin would have been forced under experiment while the other will be kept as a control, right? On one they used to perform experiment, and another they used to keep it as a control. If one twin died from an experimentation, the second twin would have been brought and killed at same time. So the doctors would then look at the effects of experimentation and compare both the bodies. That was a twin experiment. And another experiment was like a bone, muscle or nerve transplantation. Basically their bones and muscles were removed without any anesthesia. So when they are being operated, they suffered a lot of a pain. One of the survivor, they described experience as that she'd been operated twice, and both the operations were performed on one leg. And she explained that both the times she was in extreme pain and even developed a fever post surgery, and there was no care after the surgery. And she described after some time there was a lot of pus in her leg for months of time. And prisoners were also experimented on having their bone marrow injections with bacteria to study the effectiveness of new drug, so that they can help the people who are fighting the battle. Another weird experimentation was the sterilization and fertility experiment. So in 1933, there was one German law was passed, the law for prevention of a genetically defective progeny. So this law was giving authority, like if a person is weak in any way by heredity, so maybe weak-mindedness, maybe they are suffering from schizophrenia or alcoholic abuse, insanity, blindness, deafness, physical deformity. If any of this condition is with them, so this law legalized that these can be sterilized. So such a bad law it was. The law was used to encourage the growth of Aryan race and allow the sterilization of the persons who fell under the quota of being genetically defective. So 1% of the citizens between age 70 to 24 had been sterilized within 2 years of passing this law. And within 4 years, around more than 30,000 patients has been sterilized. And the method that they used for sterilizations are like X-ray, surgery or various drugs. Another experiment you can say is a Sulfonamide experiment. In this experiment, basically they wanted to investigate how effective is sulfonamide. This is basically an antimicrobial agent, how effective it is. So problem is that they created the wounds in the prisoners by infecting them with the bacteria such as Streptococcus, Clostridium, even Clostridium tetani, which developed tetanus, right? And not only that, the circulation of the blood was interrupted by tying the blood vessels at the both ends. So they try to create a condition which is similar to battlefield. And not only that, they they aggregated the subjects by injection of basically forcing wood shavings or ground glass into their wounds, so that their wound can be more worse, and the infection was treated with sulfonamide and other drugs to understand if this is working or not, right? And the sad part is these experiments were conducted without prisoners information, basically without their agreement, and this caused them even lot of suffering and harm. Many prisoners died as a result of these experiments, and those who survived, they are often left with permanent injuries and disabilities. And needless to say that how much mental trauma they have faced, right? It's not easy to undergo such a horrifying experience. And now what happened after, when the World War II was over? In December 9 on 1946, a criminal proceeding was opened against these 23 German doctors. Those were responsible for these experiments because of their crime against humanity. This was opened as at Nuremberg, and this is also known as a doctor trial. On August 1947, the judges delivered the verdict. After almost 140 days of proceeding, they got a testimony of 85 witnesses and record of like 1500 documents, and the sentence verdict was like this: 16 doctor was found guilty and 7 was sentenced to death. So after this Nuremberg Code and clinical trial was passed, the foundation of that code was the informed consent and voluntarily participation in clinical trial. Not only that, another pillar was that the experiments should be scientifically sound and they should be needed for the society. Like if you look at these experiments, these are all stupid experiments. These are not being required by the society. They are not medically or scientifically significant. So that was the one of the pillar developed in Nuremberg Code. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
watching. Turn on the notifications and do subscribe Rise and Shine channel for getting such valuable contents.